Hello, welcome to my channel, Dharma Makes. In this video, I'm going to make another miniature. This time it's an upholstered armchair with a blanket and a book. To make the armchair, I'm using a free pattern from Bentley House Miniatures and basically following the instructions exactly for the basic structure. So I just printed out the pattern on an A4 size paper and I'm just cutting out each piece carefully with my scissors. The pattern has instructions on which piece should be cut out of which material. It calls for corrugated cardboard and chipboard. So I'm just first cutting out all my pattern pieces and then I'm going to be tracing them on the appropriate materials. For some of them, the orientation is important, like for example on this back piece, because the corrugation must go vertically so that it can be bent easily along the corrugation lines. Other pieces like the seat need two pieces so that they can be doubled for stability. The leg pieces call for chipboard, so I'm tracing them out and they will also be doubled. I'm mostly cutting everything out with a very sharp craft knife. Also, the armrest pieces are this really great idea of just rolling up the chipboard to make the nice armrests. And there's also these two additional pieces which are going to be the backing for the upholstered bits. So I'm just going to take these two and put them aside for now and focus on assembling the other elements. So I'm just gluing together the two semi-ovals that make up the seat. And I've actually cut out another back piece with a little bit longer sides because maybe it was my cutting. It just wasn't long enough to go around the edges. So I erred on the side of caution and cut out a longer piece. I'm just marking the middle on these two pieces to make sure that when I'm gluing them down with hot glue, they're perfectly centered. And as you can see now, I can trim off the excess and have a perfect match. I am using hot glue for the assembly altogether. And here you can see me add just a thin bead of glue for the front legs. And I'm going to be doubling them up for some extra stability. Now the back legs need to be curved to follow the shape of the chair. So I'm just first joining the two chipboard pieces together while curved and neatening up some of the edges and then very carefully gluing it to the back. This is a little bit finicky and hot glue sets very quickly, so I need to be careful, but it can be done. I've also decided to cut out a little triangle support piece for the front legs, just for some extra structural integrity. And I'm also adding just another bead of glue just inside under the legs. Now to add the armrests, I am just rolling up these 2 pieces of chipboard, first using my pokey tool to guide them into a tight scroll, and using a dab of hot glue to fix the rolled up part in place. And I'm trying really hard to have the 2 sides coiled up exactly to the same size. And I'm just simply attaching them. This is really an effective method to create these armrests. I wouldn't have never thought of it, so I'm really grateful for the pattern. And there it is. My basic structure for the armchair is done. To reinforce it and to fill in all the gaps, including hiding the corrugation from the cardboard, I'm going to mix up a small amount of tile grout with some PVA glue and a little bit of water. I've made the paste a bit thicker than I would usually do. And I'm just using a plastic spatula to smear it basically on the entire surface of the chair, taking special care to fill in any gaps and even out any small mistakes and misalignments. And of course, filling in those holes of corrugation from the exposed cardboard. Because there's PVA glue in it, it really gets absorbed into the cardboard and it almost makes it, well, not exactly watertight, but it reduces the absorbency of the paper. So when I'm going to be adding wet mediums like paint, it won't bend out of shape and warp as much. After I applied the tile grout, it needs to dry overnight. So I'm turning my attention to the upholstered pieces. I'm just using some leftover dark green felt. The color probably doesn't matter as much, but because I'm using a very thin fabric, I wanted the color not to stand out. So I'm just gluing on the pieces of chipboard onto a piece of felt and then doubling up again, adding another layer so that we get this really nice cushioned effect. And I do exactly the same for the back piece, except I have already pre-bent the back piece a little bit. Now that I have these 2 pieces with felt, I'm going to pull out the fabric that I'm going to be using for the lining and picking a spot, cutting out a big enough piece to wrap it. And I'm just going to continue using hot glue to wrap the cushion piece. This is a little bit tricky, and yes, I did burn my fingers a few times. It can be done with tacky glue or wood glue. I just don't have patience to stand there holding the pieces until the glue dries. Sort of doing my best to wrap these pieces as taut and as smooth as I can. I'm sure there's a better method for miniature upholstery, but I haven't done this many times, so I'm learning as I go. And again, I repeat the exact same process for the back piece, except this time I added some slits around the perimeter because it's all curves and only one straight edge. It just allowed me to wrap it more easily. because I had little bits of felt left over, I thought I'd make a cushion. So I started out by cutting out a rectangular piece of fabric and then just gluing it together with the hot glue, kind of measuring and a little bit and sealing in 3 of the edges, cutting it down to size, and then turning it inside out so that those glued seams are the inside. But now when I'm trying to add the felt, I realize it's just very flat and it doesn't look like a fluffy cushion at all. So instead I went and grabbed some polyester fiber and stuffed my little cushion, and this way it's like nice and chunky. And I'm also sealing up the last edge, turning it inside and sealing it with hot glue. I got a cute little fluffy cushion out of it that matches the chair. The next day, when my chair is fully dried, I can measure that my cushion pieces match perfectly, which I'm really happy with. But I am going to take a nail file to it just to get rid of some rough edges and bumps and maybe imperfections in that layer of tile grout. I sort of want a smooth surface. When I'm done with that, I want to add some decorative elements. I want this armchair to look cozy. I want it to look a little bit vintage, and I also want it to have the vibe of maybe belonging to a granny. So I thought adding on this lace ribbon in different areas of the chair and layering it is going to create a really nice, interesting texture. So first of all, I'm just going around kind of like the skirt of the chair and also going around the back piece. I'm manipulating the lace ribbon to sort of wrap around the edge, making it look even neater and adding the decorative element. It was a little bit tricky to work it in place in the back, but because the lace is quite soft and because I took my time, I managed to sort of like force it into the position that I wanted. I'm adding another little bit of lace to cover more of the back, and I'm also adding a layer inside to sort of hide the seam where the armrests join the seat. Finally, I've decided to add another layer for bulk and to have that continued lace element come all the way around to the front under the armrests. The next step is painting. I'm using a nice creamy chocolate brown to coat the entire chair in a generous amount. I'm being very thorough and careful, and I'm using lots of paint to saturate the fibers of the lace ribbon, both to thoroughly color it and that I would have no white spots left over, and because the acrylic paint itself will stiffen up the lace. And of course, I leave it to dry for many hours. The next step is dry brushing. And as you can see, I'm just using a nice, big, soft, fluffy brush. And I'm gently dry brushing all over the surface of the entire chair. And I don't need to do a lot of detailed effort all of that texture that I've added with the lace is actually taking care of the final look of the chair. The dry brushing catches all the raised areas and makes it look like sort of a carved and intricately carved wooden chair. And it also makes it look a little bit worn. I forgot to turn my camera on, but I just simply glued the seat and the back piece in place. I wanted to add a little blanket so that it's like a cozy little nook. And for this I am using a piece of yellow felt. I've sort of just measured a rectangle that seems to be an appropriate size for this chair, and I'm cutting it out. And to make it look more like an actual blanket, I'm going to stitch the edges. I'm going to be using some embroidery thread, and I found a color that matches nearly perfectly with the color of the upholstery. And I'm just going to use 3 strands of the embroidery floss, and I'm going to use a blanket stitch appropriately to go all around the edges, add that decorative element. It's very recognizable from real life blankets, and also it reinforces those edges of a fairly soft felt so that they don't fray with much handling or over time. As you can see, I'm just quite quickly and easily going around the edge of the blanket. And it's not perfect handiwork, but because of how I want it to be draped on the chair, I can hide any imperfections. Now, I didn't like that it was such a bright yellow. I wanted to tone it down. So I made a very, very watered down mixture of the same chocolate brown acrylic paint. As you can see, I'm basically just staining it. So when I squeezed out the extra water, some of the pigment stayed behind in this splotchy way. And I'm going to dry it overnight on a paper towel. I also want to add a little book. I have this miniature book from before with actual pages, and I'm just coloring the edge of the cover and eventually of the pages themselves, just to have that extra dimension and wanting it to look like a well-worn book. And I'm sort of just like toying to see where it would fit better. The idea is to have it be kind of like a moment in time when someone got up, left their blanket and their book, and I don't know, maybe went off to stir the fire. So at miniature scale, fabric doesn't naturally drape like in real life because it's not heavy enough. So to form those folds and gatherings that would happen naturally at normal scale, I am going to be using little dabs of hot glue to mimic the folds of a blanket. And as you can see, I'm sort of like adding glue here and there and working in those wrinkles in a way that seem nice and natural to me. And by the end, I'm left with this little stitched blanket attached to the chair. And the final step is, of course, to attach the book, and it took me a few minutes to decide exactly where it would go, but finally I found a home for it. And here it is, my comfortable little armchair is finished. I really like the idea of a moment in time, and I like the idea of a cozy little reading nook, and it's just one of those projects that really just makes me happy to look at. And I am very grateful for Bentley House Minis for making the pattern free for all of us to use. I will definitely put a link in the description. Thank you for watching the video. Please do let me know what you think about it in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. Consider visiting my channel and watching more videos. I have a lot of other miniature projects on there, as well as proper embroidery projects. I publish new videos every week. If you'd like to catch them, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye.